Hey, welcome to Stuff to Blow Your Mind Trailer Talk. My name is Robert Lamb.
I'm Christian Sager.
And I'm Joe McCormick, and we are the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast in the How Stuff Works family. This is not the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, if you're not familiar with us. This is Trailer Talk, where we come on here on social media and talk about some movies related to topics we've recently discussed on the podcast. Now, if you're not subscribed to the podcast, you can check us out wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. Hit subscribe and you'll see what we're all about. But you guys just recently had some episodes about this week's topic. What is it?
We talked about alien abduction on both of this week's episodes. We spent a good 2.5 hours talking about it, so we split it into 2 episodes. The first half is primarily about the academic research being done on the experience of alien abductions, trying to figure out what is going on in the human psychological experience with this. In the second half, we focused more on the cultural experience and the idea that alien abductions may be tied into our pop culture more than we think they are.
Yeah, because we take a pretty skeptical approach to the whole scenario. When we look at that and say, all right, what are the scientific situations that could be going on here? How can we actually explain these paranormal experiences through the natural world? But then, even once you take into these various explanations, such as sleep paralysis, etc., you still have to make sense of this narrative of the alien abduction and probing, all the various elements of the tale. Like, where do these come from? What does it say about predominantly the second half of the 20th century from which it emerged?
Yeah, and so just to start off, I imagine many of you who are just watching this, and if you're not familiar with us, or even if you are familiar with us, you might be like, alien abductions, really, guys? But I want to give you some stats to start off with to just give you an idea here. A 2012 National Geographic poll found that 77% of Americans believe that aliens have visited Earth.
What?
80% believe that alien life exists on other planets. You can count me among that.
Yeah, that's no great stretch.
That's less controversial.
But a 2015 Ipsos poll found that 56% of Americans believe in UFOs.
Now, that 77% poll, I'm curious about that. Was that a real randomized poll, or was that one of those online clicker polls?
I saw it on a presidential social media account.
We didn't have access to their methodology. This was repurposed in one of the major studies that we looked at was a broad review of all academic research done on alien abduction in the last 35 years.
Well, I'm totally willing to be proven wrong, but I would highly suspect that number is generated by some kind of selection bias.
Well, you say proof, and that's, of course, one of the key things to hit here, is that there's absolutely no proof that aliens exist, B, that aliens have visited the Earth, or that they have interacted with humans in any way. All we have are eyewitness accounts, memories, and testimony, and these are, of course, all susceptible to a number of different events, such as things that are tweaking the sensory experience themselves, or then in the case of memory, tweaking our recollection.
Yeah, so just to get us grounded here, and we did this in the podcast as well, this is a science show, yes, and we're grounded in science and skepticism, but at the same time, we're going to go into this with an open mind, in the sense that at least I believe that many of the people who believe they're abductees are telling the truth. And so a lot of the studies are actually more about whether or not these people are lying, or whether or not aliens exist, rather than they're about what is actually going on here when people have this experience.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't believe in alien visitation, but I do believe that people have experiences that are paranormal, that feel paranormal, that don't make sense, and they have to turn to various narratives to understand what happened to them. And we try to honor that in the podcast episode. We're going to try and honor it here today, but we are going to be looking at some trailers for some films that take varying approaches to the alien abduction narrative.
I'd say a lot of these films both take the narrative and regurgitate it back to us as a mass society, but then also have contributed to the narrative as well. We'll actually find out how one of these movies subsequently influenced the creation of another movie through alien abduction experiences. Before we move on, though, just want to remind everybody, so the podcast is available. Both episodes are out now. One came out on Tuesday, the other came out on Thursday. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, really anywhere you want to get podcasts. I have a question, though, that I want to start the episode off. So, please, do you know anyone who has ever experienced an alien abduction, or just any abduction experience? Because it turns out that they're not always alien-based. Sometimes it's fairies, sometimes it's angels, sometimes it's demons. But anything even remotely like that, or sleep paralysis, because we've heard from several listeners in the last 3 days who have told us they've experienced both.
Yeah. All right, well, we're going to kick things off with one of the earlier UFO alien abduction-related films. And we don't have a full trailer for this one because it was a TV movie, but it's 1975's The UFO Incident. And it actually details the most famous case, so kind of the case zero for this.
Yeah, this is a case of Barney and Betty Hill, and it happened in 1961. I won't go through all the details. We do a lot of that on the podcast. But essentially, this is a married couple that saw UFOs in New Hampshire, and then they went back home and they realized they had lost time. Subsequently, they went to a hypnotherapist. The hypnotherapist uncovered memories of theirs. This is sort of the standard formula for a lot of alien abduction narratives.
Yeah, and that is James Earl Jones there, by the way.
Right, James Earl Jones
himself
plays. Yeah, I was going to say Darth Vader, but yeah, he's both. And he's Barney Hill.
That's
And you know what was funny? When I was pulling clips for this to give to our producer, there's videos of the actual Betty Hill on YouTube. You can go and listen to her talk about the experience herself still. I believe Barney died much earlier than she did.
We have photographs of them on the landing page for the second episode at StuffToBlowYourMind.com.
Yeah, so this is, sort of ground zero. Like, obviously there were reports before this, but this was the one that really blew up in the media. Joe, you were going to say something?
No, I think we moved past it, whatever it was.
Oh,
Though,
okay.
I mean, I do want to point out that I'm sure you guys get into this in the episode, but there are multiple different types of claims of UFO experiences. For example, I can think of lots of claims going way back of people seeing UFOs, such as pilots who claim to see flying saucers and stuff like that, before people started saying I was taken up into the domain of the aliens and they manipulated me or I lost time with them or something like that.
But then again, it comes back around to people have always seen strange lights in the sky.
Right.
And people have always had these experiences with, say, incubi and succubi or other sort of
fairy abductions,
visitations,
One of the things that we get into in the episodes, and we might talk a little bit about here, but that this is essentially a 20th century narrative applied on top of this experience. It's not that human beings weren't having these experiences before then, but the golden age of science fiction, kind of right after or during World War II, exploded this because that narrative was easy to turn to when you were having like a sleep paralysis event or some kind of, brain problem.
And you think I didn't look up the specific data on this, but you think about something like the UFO incident. And think of TV culture at the time. How many people, I wonder, ended up watching that film, or at least saw the promos for it, knew that it existed, and were some way had their psyche touched by it,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually important, not to this next trailer, but the trailer after it, a movie called Fire in the Sky that we're going to talk about shortly. But now, let's turn to one of my favorite pieces of alien abduction entertainment. I believe Joe loves this as well. It is the classic X-Files episode, Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
Now, if you are not a fan of the X-Files, if you've never watched the show before, you can watch this episode standing alone. You don't really need to know anything about the show. It might be a little more fun if you know the characters, but basically all you need to know is that Mulder and Scully on the X-Files are FBI agents who investigate the paranormal, and aliens often pop up on the show. you know that much. You're great to go into this episode. It totally speaks for itself, and it is so much fun.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great episode written by Darren Morgan, who we often talk about in The Office as being one of the best writers on The X-Files.
Like the 4 best episodes of The X-Files ever were the 4 he wrote.
Yeah. But I want to touch on this because Jose Chung's From Outer Space is a perfect specimen of pop culture looking at alien abduction experiences because it looks at all the different perspectives that can lead to it and how you, like the lenses, as Robert likes to refer to it as on the podcast, of how you can sort of perceive what is happening to you. And I think you get some of that cultural stuff we were talking about as well. So one of those is space exploration really took off in the 50s and 60s. Another one is the Cold War inspired a fear of invasion, so you combine that with the alien science fiction stuff going on. Out-of-body experiences got really big because of mysticism and drug use. And then in the 1980s, there was a huge fear of strangers because of an increase, or at least an increase in perception, of child abduction and sexual molestation reportings. Now here's where it gets interesting for you X-Files fans out there. Remember when the X-Files stopped being as good as it was? Chris Carter, the creator of the X-Files, actually says that he thinks the reason why is because of 9/11. Because 9/11 as an event kind of rewrote, like it rewrote the cultural narrative, and it made it so that the mood that the X-Files was creating wasn't as important anymore. Those other things that were contributing to the cultural narrative didn't quite work as much.
Yeah, I think that other people have pointed out similar things beyond just the ideas like alien abduction and all that. I mean, if you look at broadly just like big budget action movies and stuff like that,
right?
You can get the feeling that they were much more fantastical before 9/11, those produced in the United States at least, and that we sort of entered this period where everything was trying to get really dark and gritty for a while.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting kind of X-Files is actually like a marker point. Although a lot of people say, "Oh, well, there must not be as many alien abductions anymore because you don't hear about them that much."
Right, and everyone has a phone with a camera these days. I think that's I think it's a fair criticism to a certain extent. Like if everyone has a phone, then we should be more likely to have footage of Bigfoot encounters and as well as alien abductions and UFOs. But then on the other hand, the counter argument is that people are just retreating into their own social media bubbles to discuss these things.
Yeah, and as we found, there's a lot of talk about these things on boards like Reddit, so it's not as public anymore.
I don't know if you encountered this excuse much, but a very convenient explanation is that abduction encounters very often include the detail that electronics fail in the presence of aliens.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that's true for our next one. I smell... Magic marker. I think we've got a comment.
Nicola says, I have had sleep paralysis. I thought I died and passed on. You have no idea you are not in reality at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've read a lot of experiences about sleep paralysis. There are documentaries about it. It sounds like it can be a very terrifying experience, akin to the most powerful hallucinations anybody experiences.
Yeah. Robert has, if you want to go visit stufftoblowyourmind.com, he did a fantastic video about sleep paralysis that's available on our site.
Yeah, the short version of sleep paralysis, though, is if you're having a dream about kung fu fighting in the night, your mind has put your body on lockdown so that you're not actually throwing any kung fu chops. But in sleep paralysis, you wake up, but instead of the lockdown going away so that you can get a drink of water or turn on the light, what have you, instead you wake up and your body is still in lockdown.
This can be especially terrifying if it is paired with hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations, which are hallucinations that are very common. They're not necessarily a sign that anything's going wrong with you, but they're just extremely common hallucinations people experience at the borders of sleep while going to sleep and while waking up.
Really good example we touch on with this in the episode is like when you're just falling asleep and you sort of are dreaming of walking down a flight of stairs and all of a sudden you drop through and you feel like your body is falling.
Or you're reading a book and you find yourself reading words that are not actually on the page. I encounter that one a lot. Like when you start reading a book that isn't there, it's time to just go ahead and go to sleep.
So let's go on to our next trailer. And please, if you guys have any questions, we'd love to get more. If you have comments about alien abduction experiences you're familiar with or sleep paralysis experiences, please let us know. We'd love to talk back to you in the sort of interactive format here on Facebook Live.
And hey, if you're just tuning in, if you don't know who we are the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast out of the How Stuff Works office. This is not the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. This is Stuff to Blow Your Mind Trailer Talk, where we come on here, talk about movies related to our most recent podcast episodes. Last week, this week actually, you guys had a couple of episodes, a two-parter come out about alien abduction, so we're talking about alien abduction movies.
All right, well, let's hit the next trailer. This is taking us back to 1993, and this is a pretty awesome trailer. I only saw this movie for the first time yesterday.
Same here.
But I remember the trailer from when I was younger.
I
being
missed
kind of
this
terrified
completely
by it.
because I was living overseas when this came out.
I
But
mean, check out this cool
it is
chakra
great.
thing they do at the beginning.
And that is not in the movie at
Yeah.
any point.
Yeah.
So this movie is called Fire in the Sky, and it's actually based on a real experience. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But it is sort of one of these forgotten alien abduction movies, but it is heralded because it has one of the best sequences in terms of special effects of the actual abduction experience.
Yeah, so the film itself is good. It's very watchable. It's well acted. You have Robert Patrick, Craig Sheffer, Peter Berg, James Garner, and D.B. Sweeney plays the main character here.
Yep.
But in the midst of what is a good movie, you have this incredible alien abduction sequence that just does this amazing job of feeling just thoroughly paranormal. So there's shades of Jacob's Ladder, which came out 3 years earlier. We see the character Walton wake up in a sort of wasp nest organic casket, and he's inside of this giant zero gravity cylinder. Yeah. There's organic matter everywhere, slime and ooze.
I was shocked at how dirty the alien ship was. Like, they did not clean up after
but also
themselves.
just thoroughly inhuman. You know,
Yeah.
And in a way that does not feel Giger-esque.
Like a cave.
Yeah, it's like a cave, and then the aliens themselves, they have these masks that look like, you know, a typical gray alien, but then they're these fabulous humanoid creatures with kind of brownish skin, and it's all practical effects. It looks marvelous.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like hidden inside of this average motion picture, you have a phenomenal paranormal nightmare short film.
Absolutely, yeah. And so this is based on a real case that ironically occurred in 1975, and as Robert was telling us before we went live, was influenced by the Barney and Betty Hill incident, by the UFO incident.
Yes, that's the allegation. So it's based on a book by Travis Walton, and Travis Walton's the main character you see on the table here in this clip. And he actually came up with his abduction story 2 weeks after the television release of 75's The UFO Incident, which we were talking about earlier. And critics have argued that this influenced his own recollection. And this is a common aspect of alien abduction scenarios. They say that our media has such a strong influence on it, on how we end up shaping these things.
Yeah, so I do want to touch on like a little bit of the academic stuff here, because I think Fire in the Sky is a great example of one of the theories that we read by a team by these two guys, Roy Baumeister and Leonard Newman. And they basically came up with this theory that abduction encounters are essentially subconscious attempts of human beings trying to rid themselves of self-awareness through masochistic fantasies.
It doesn't get any more masochistic than this.
So like when you watch this whole experiment process, it's very, he's being very, I guess, humiliated. He's a victim, right? But the abductees, they claim, are looking for narratives that provide us an escape from ourselves and represent our masochistic wishes to experience pain, powerlessness, and humiliation on a grand cosmic level. So they're really, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that study.
Sounds kind of Freudian.
Yeah. But their essential argument is that, we're all looking to explain our existence through sort of I guess it's like reverse cosmic horror, right? It's rather than being terrified at your insignificance in the universe, it gives you an understanding of what your place is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a significant event, and if nothing else, if you have this abduction encounter in your memory, you have this at least one moment in your life where it's like being touched by God, right?
Yeah,
You've
right.
become a central figure on the entire planet among the entire species.
I think we've got another comment.
Comment. Sam writes, this is from Kevin. Why did NASA just make a space protector job if we are the only intelligent
This
life?
is actually something we can speak to. They didn't just make the space, what you're referring to, the space protector
the
job.
Planetary Protection Officer is a position that has existed for a long time, and it's not just protection from intelligent life. Now, I don't know if its job title has
It's
changed.
protection of us from infecting other planets as well.
Right.
Yeah, so it's two-way protection, actually.
All I know is I think Jared Kushner is going to do a great job. I think we're in good hands.
The Planetary Protection Officer primarily is concerned with cross-contamination of microbes between Earth and alien environments. Now, we don't know if there are any other microbes in the solar system. For all we know, they only exist here. But even that could be a problem because now the worst-case scenario would be, say, we land a lander probe on Titan, and it picks up some soil and returns it to Earth, and some of the soil actually contains virulent microbes in it that get out and kill all of humanity or something like that. That's what we want to prevent, but we also want to prevent accidentally contaminating sites on Mars or other moons in the solar system with life from Earth that could confuse future scientists.
Right, so that they'll look at those sites and go, oh, wait, we found traces of life, and they don't realize that they're traces of life that we left there by accident.
Well, this is fabulous you bring this up because we're talking about a very scientific search for life elsewhere in our universe, and in doing so, we do not want data to be contaminated by anything human.
Right.
And that is essentially the problem with all accounts of alien abduction and UFO sightings, is that it is heavily influenced by human human failings, or at least a susceptibility to human failings in memory and perception, etc.
I imagine the three of us could probably talk about this ad nauseum because we actually have an episode entirely on this topic. So if you want a good... Actually, it's one of our live episodes.
It's called Planetary Contamination.
Yeah,
it's a live one from last year.
We performed the show live at a Star Trek convention, and this was the topic that we chose to bring to it so we could explain the Prime Directive from Star Trek.
Yeah.
So... please go check that out. Hope you like it.
But yeah, anyway, I would say even if there are no other intelligent life forms anywhere in the universe, which we have no idea either way, but even if there aren't, planetary protection is a very important job.
Look how
they probably look like this guy, though.
Yeah, look how great that special effect is for 1993. That alien looked great.
I mean, if this movie was a little later, it would be a horrible CGI.
Totally.
mutant,
Yeah, exactly. That's what I keep thinking. I'm like, the effects in this movie surely must have been cheaper than having like a squadron of programmers create that stuff digitally, and it looks better.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
All right, you guys ready to go on? This is the one I haven't seen, but seems a little weird, so I'm going to keep quiet on here, and I want you guys to educate me.
All right, a little weird is putting it mildly. We're talking about 1976, and we're talking about God Told Me To, a film written and directed by the legendary Larry Cohen. Do you want to give a little info about Larry Cohen here?
He made the It's Alive movies, which are about giant killer babies with like scary snaggle teeth. It's not the most pleasant film series, but this movie also is not exactly pleasant. It is a sleazy 70s kind of grimy police procedural, paranormal horror. It straddles a bunch of different genres. But I will say I really enjoyed it. If you've got a taste for sleazy 70s stuff and can put up with that kind of thing, it's pretty interesting and it's pretty creepy.
I gotta say, this seems right up my alley, and I've never heard of this movie before.
I think you dig it. Yeah.
I love exactly what you're describing, like that brand of movie. You know, like this seems like the kind of thing that you would see like William Friedkin come up with or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it has that.
What's his name? The guy who did The Devils.
Ken Russell?
Yeah, Ken Russell.
Ken Russell, huh? So this movie, one thing I noted, I just watched it for the first time last night on y'all's recommendation. Our producer here, Ramsey, insisted that I watch it. And it has a scene that, if you go watch this movie now, keep an eye out for this, a scene that I think is almost perfectly replicated in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. It's a scene where there is a military parade, or not a military parade, sorry, a police parade through the middle of a city.
St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah,
right?
St. Patrick's Day. It's got bagpipes. It's got the police marching down the street in their full uniforms with gloves, and it's got a police police officer who starts shooting up the place, and
is
people
it
have to
Andy
take
Kaufman?
him down.
It
It's
is.
Andy Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman's the one who shoots up.
Well,
the place?
actually, I don't know if he's the shooter. Andy Kaufman
No,
is in the scene.
Kaufman is the shooter.
Really?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally need to see this. I will watch it this weekend.
Now, in addition to Andy Kaufman in a minor role, you have Tony LoBianco in this, and he's mostly known for this film. I want to say, the Honeymoon Murders, the Honeymoon Killers.
I've never seen it.
And one other film, not The French Connection, I think. Maybe it was The French Connection.
See, I thought this was Christopher Lambert from.
No, this is Richard Lynch.
Oh, Richard Lynch is.
They're easy to confuse. Richard Lynch.
He's so good in Werewolf, one of my favorite Mystery Science Theater 3000 movies.
Isn't he in one of the Scanners movies too?
He should have been.
Should have been
wasn't.
if he wasn't. Yeah, he's in Scanner Cop. I think he's the
okay.
villain in Scanner Cop. He always plays villains in direct-to-video and TV movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he has that kind of Michael Ironside quality to him.
Yes.
It's a shame. I don't know that he was never in Highlander. Maybe, but he should have been.
Here he looks kind of like a golden Alice Cooper.
In a way, yeah, he is a golden. Well, okay. At this point, I want to say we're gonna have some spoilers for God Told Me To.
Okay.
So, cover your ears or just tune out for a second here. But here we go. So basically, as Joe said, we have a police procedural that descends into an increasingly supernatural realm, complete with psychic mayhem, religious experience, virgin birth, alien abduction experience, the second coming of Christ, and Christ here or a Christ-like being, played by Richard Lynch, that's hermaphroditic.
Okay.
And has a sex organ in his side where the spear wound of Christ would be.
Gotcha.
So stigmatic in that respect.
Totally.
And then there's also blaxploitation elements to this as well. So it has it all.
Got it. Okay, I see now why our producer Ramsey was comparing it to The Visitor.
Looks like we have a comment coming in.
Alana June
says, "Would you three mind sharing your personal opinions on abductions?"
No, I wouldn't at all. We actually talk about it a bit on the podcast. Do you want to go ahead first?
I don't know if my opinion is all that unusual. I mean, I would say that I don't think it's very likely the Earth has been visited by aliens from other planets. Just the distances to traverse between stars are so great, and I hold pretty firmly to the limits established by relativity on how fast the spacecraft can travel. So I think there are a lot of reasons to think it's unlikely intelligent aliens have come to Earth. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I don't take people's experiences seriously. So I think a lot of times when people report alien abductions, they probably aren't just making up a story or lying. Some probably are. But some other ones I think are probably telling the truth about some kind of experience they had. That's a very important thing to understand as part of our culture and part of the human mind.
Yeah, and I think I agree with everything you just said. I think that we haven't quite fully cracked the nut that is the human mind, and so there's experiences that we have that we can't explain, right? But there is a compelling argument that is made by some researchers, which is essentially that the experience itself is sleep paralysis or something like it, and then you wake up, you remember this experience, then you end up going to see a hypnotherapist or some other kind of cognitive behavioral therapist, whatever. You recall memories, and the reason why is that there's evidence that shows that it is incredibly easy under hypnotherapy to insert false memories. So it's sort of like a multifold experience in that you've got a combination of sleep paralysis, the false memory insertion, and then the broader cultural thing going on where the narrative is able to latch onto things like these movies.
Yeah, and we talked about some of the science of deep regression hypnosis and false memory implantation in the episode you and I did about the X-Files a couple of years ago, right?
Yep.
Yep, and we also got into it in the Satanic Panic episode. Now, for my own part, I'm not going to go into basically all the things that I share on the podcast, but something extra that came out of interactions with a listener, they pointed out that certain visions that we may have in meditation or in Shavasana particularly are not that out of keeping with some of what's described with these paranormal experiences. So I instantly think to the fact that I had a Shavasana vision once. This is after you've done yoga, you're laying down, it's a meditative state.
It's
and
really easy to see lights and things
Yeah,
like that.
you see lights, and I saw one particularly vivid vision I had was of a triangular shape in the sky, that seemed to have like almost godlike properties. This was the vision, right? But I also think back. I had a couple of great aunts who claimed to have seen a triangular UFO in the sky. So really, how is my thing different from theirs? Though they would tell their story and people would accuse them of drinking too much. But I tell my story and it's connected with yoga and it's okay.
But I think the important thing here is, and I think all three of us are on the same page on that like we may not believe that it's actual alien abduction, but we believe that people are experiencing something that feels like that.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to move on to probably the best known movie on this list?
Sure, but right before we do, we should probably just remind them who we are. If you've just recently tuned in, we are the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast out of the How Stuff Works offices. This is not the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. This is Trailer Talk, where we come on and talk about some movies related to recent episodes. Just this week, you guys had a 2-part episode on alien abduction experiences and the science and psychology around that, so that's why we're talking about alien abduction movies today.
So this next movie, which is going to be spoiled by our wonderful backdrop here, is actually, this is the 40th anniversary of this movie. Can you believe it?
Huh.
Are they re-releasing it in theaters?
They are, yeah. In like the next month or so, I think it's going to be hitting theaters again.
Is Alamo Draft Half-Life, I'm assuming they're either going to show it on the Devil's Tower or just everybody in the theater gets mashed potatoes.
You get to make your own mashed potato pile.
You sit in the mashed potatoes.
So this is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Probably the best known of these, a Steven Spielberg masterpiece, a lot of people think. What I wanted to add on to this movie, because I think that this is one of the few movies we're going to look at today that does this, something I learned doing the research for these episodes is that most abductees report that their experience is actually positive, and they call it a life-changing event in that way. And this is connected to our human need to believe in something. So it's sort of a reversal of that Baumeister theory from earlier. And the idea here is that we all have the need to feel less alone in the world. We desire to have special powers or abilities, the longing to know that there's something out there other than ourselves, something that's important, something that's watching over us. And so if you have this experience, it can be very fulfilling and positive in that way.
You know what this kind of reminds me of is that a while back, Robert and I did an episode about Incubus, the Incubus legend.
The band, right?
No, but Incubus experiences were basically demonology and witchcraft in the Middle Ages. People believing that they were visited by an incubus or a succubus in the night that was a demon. And we talked about this book. I believe it's called The Demon Lovers. Who's the author?
Walter Stevens.
You brought
Walter
up Demon
Stevens,
Lovers in this episode,
And one of the things behind Walter Stevens' theory is that he thinks, judging on the literature of the time, that one of the main motivations causing people to believe in witchcraft and these demon visitations was actually a kind of shakiness of faith and belief in God, and that people believed that essentially that if you could prove demons were real and witchcraft was real, then you could also prove God was real by analogy, and that in a kind of counterintuitive way, it was giving people more hope and more ability to cling on to the positive beliefs that they held if they could also affirm these negative beliefs.
Yeah, it becomes physical evidence, bodily evidence that you can point to, and you see that with UFO experiences as well. People who claim to have things implanted in their bodies, or they had a physical, intrusive aspect to the abduction. They can say, well, here's physical proof that there's something greater than ourselves, and maybe, just maybe, they'll come here and help us solve the problems that we can't solve on our own. Maybe they'll come and help initiate some of the social advances that we seem incapable of achieving.
Actually, we had a listener on social media earlier this week when the episodes were first published say, I could use an alien abduction right about now, given all of the rhetoric over nuclear war that's been going on. I think the idea that there's somebody that's more powerful than us that could somehow intervene is appealing.
Which is very common to the science fiction in the middle 20th century. I mean, if you see The Day the Earth Stood Still, that's the core theme is that aliens show up and sit down and say, you're about to destroy yourselves, you've got to stop it or we're going to do something.
Yeah. So why don't we move from this film to something that's a little less of a positive alien abduction experience. And this is a movie I don't think any of the three of us have seen, but I want to see it.
I've read more about it than I've seen. I haven't read the book that it's based upon.
Is this Whitley Strieber we're going to here?
It is, yeah.
But I've read a lot about Strieber and his persona and his influence on alien abduction culture.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but so this movie is going to be Communion, right?
Yep.
Based on the Whitley Strieber novel, memoir, whatever he claimed.
We'll just say
It's
book.
very similar to Fire in the Sky, actually, because it's a purported account.
I don't want to misrepresent, but I think the way I've read about it is that Strieber used to be very adamant that these experiences were real, and he was really reporting something that actually happened to him, and that maybe later on he was a little less committed to claiming that it actually happened and might have sort of hinted that it was, fictional invention.
I don't know the actual story on that, but given when this happened and the trajectory of how research into abductions went over the course of the last 25 years or so, I could absolutely see that being the case. Because it was really the end of the 90s, early 2000s when the sleep paralysis explanation connected to fake, false implanted memories really took hold. So it's possible that he was just convinced by that. But yeah, this movie looks creepy, and I've never had an opportunity to watch it.
I mean, you have Walken right there, slap dab in the middle of it, playing the main character.
So actually, this is a good opportunity to bring up another fact we learned in the episode. Okay, most people, when they hear about alien abductees, they think, "Oh, well, that person's clearly crazy," right? And what they usually assume is that there's some kind of mental health problem. Now, actually, two researchers who we talk about a lot in the episode, McNally and Clancy, they showed that the mental health of abductees doesn't differ dramatically from the general population. They basically took a bunch of abductees and a bunch of just people who have never experienced anything like that and gave them a wide berth of psychological tests, and they found that they're essentially the same. The main things that you find in abductees are that they score higher on something called the dissociative experiences scale, the absorption scale, and the magical ideation scale, or ideation scale. So my proposal is that we get a hold of those scales and the three of us take those tests. Because I want to take those tests. Yeah, I think that'd be fun. Okay, Communion. I think we've only got two more left. Want to go through these?
Let's see. And we're running short on time. Should we hit them both or just one?
Let's do just one.
Okay.
Which one?
Which one have you guys seen? I've only seen this one.
I've seen neither of these.
Let's do the last one, Flight of the Navigator.
All right.
So we were going to do Dark Skies. That's an okay movie. It came out a couple years ago. I saw it. It's fine, but there isn't a lot there other than really talking about more experimental studies that are close to that.
Maybe right before we talk about this trailer, I should just remind you that we are the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast in the How Stuff Works family. This is not the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, but it is Trailer Talk, where we talk about movies related to recent episodes of the show. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you can find us wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. Go there, hit subscribe, check out what we do. If you are familiar with us, hey. And so we are talking about alien abduction movies because you guys had a couple of episodes this week on alien abduction science.
Yeah, and since this is our last trailer, if you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. So if you have questions for us just in general about the podcast, about Robert, me, or Joe, or if you just want to include a comment that you'd like some response to that's about alien abductions, sleep paralysis, whatever, ask away. And we're going to talk about Flight of the Navigator.
This is an odd film, if anyone, for any of you who remember watching it as a kid, because on one hand, it's a fun abduction film. He ends up going on an adventure with magical friends and robots and funny creatures.
Yeah.
But then it gets traumatic because they're traveling. I forget if they're traveling faster than. I assume they're traveling faster than light in this.
I think there is a point where they do. Yeah.
But at any rate, it ends up traveling at such speed that, and due to the relativity of time, he returns back home to Earth as a child, and he's been missing for years. His parents are older. I think he has a sister that's older.
He has a younger brother who's older.
A younger brother, yes. Yeah. And so it's terrifying because suddenly you're having to, especially as a child, you're thinking about your parents getting older. You're thinking about the trauma they would go through if you just disappeared for years on end. It's a well-made movie, don't get me wrong, but I remember as a kid, it kind of hit that Gremlins territory of me being just unsure how I was supposed to feel about everything.
Flight of the Navigator 2, I was trying to find a way to connect this movie to the research that we read for these episodes, and I really couldn't because, for instance, like the sleep paralysis thing does not connect to this because if he disappeared for 7 years and then showed up again, obviously that's well beyond our understanding of what's going on with abductions.
I guess you could tie it into lost time. That would be the main area.
Yeah, totally. But it's a fascinating movie. I love the idea that movies that were for kids in the 80s, when we look back on them now, we're like, geez, that was creepy.
I started watching Neverending Story the other day,
Yeah,
and I went
that's
into it thinking,
one.
when's my boy going to be ready for this? And it starts off with this scene of just horrific bullying.
Yeah, totally.
Without any magic at all. And that's before horses start drowning in bogs.
Yeah, that horse scene messed me up. We got something?
Comment coming in. Todd asks, if you had to be abducted by movie aliens, which would you choose?
Oh.
Wow.
That is a
loaded
great question, Todd.
Oh, man.
Wow, okay.
I want to know, please leave comments. Let us know which aliens you would be abducted by.
Predator.
Ramsey, our
That's a
producer,
great
says he
answer.
wants to be abducted by predators. I believe they're called the Yautja.
Well, he knows that he'd have a fighting chance,
Yeah.
I mean, nothing else, they're fair. They're fair.
Right. Fair fighters.
I mean, I guess if I was just going based on, whether or not it would be a pleasant experience or not, it would be Flight of the Navigator's spaceship or the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But if I really wanted some questions answered, I'm going to have to go with the engineers from Prometheus.
Yeah?
I want to see what David Bowman saw at the end of 2001. So whatever that alien civilization is that lifts him up, I want to, take me along.
Well, I'm not sure what my current answer would be, but I know what my junior high and teenage answer was, and that was because I remember reading Slaughterhouse-5, in which you had, what were they, the
Tralfamadorians?
Yes, who captured the main character, and then they keep him naked in a human zoo with a model of some kind or an actress.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, so
It's been forever since
that
I
really
read that.
appealed to the junior high me.
So
it would
it
not be
goes.
my answer.
Yeah.
So it goes. It would not be my answer today. I'd have to think more about it.
All right, well, hopefully that answers that. You guys want to wrap it up here?
Yeah.
Just give some kind of final notes on this. If there's any other questions, pop them in now. But this week's episodes, just as a reminder, they're both about alien abductions. One came out on Tuesday, the other came out on Thursday. You're looking at about 2 hours or so of podcast loveliness from Robert and myself. If you don't know, if you've never listened to this podcast before and you're like, well, that's cool, but where do I get it? I just only use Facebook. You can get them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play, and anywhere else.
StuffToBlowYourMind.com.
Bam,
Yeah.
But
there.
wherever you go, the main thing you should do is not just download those, but hit the subscribe button so we keep coming at you.
Yeah, anywhere you get your podcast. If you go somewhere and you ask for Stuff to Blow Your Mind and they don't have it, it's probably like a grocery store or a gas station or something, and they don't sell podcasts anyway.
Driving up to Taco Bell saying, I want to get that Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast.
One last thing for those of you that might be watching this after we've actually been live with it. If you still have questions, please type them in. We'll be popping on here for the next couple days. We'll be answering stuff. We'll be engaging with people who want to talk to us. So please let us know what you're thinking about alien abductions and all the movies that have been made about them.
Sam, any questions, comments?
All right.
No?
All right, sounds good.
All right, well, it was fun hanging out with y'all today.
Bye.
Keep watching the skies.
Clock.
He learned almost too late that man is a feeling creature. And because of it, the greatest in the universe. He learned too late for himself that men have to find their own way to make their own mistakes. There can't be any gift of perfection from outside ourselves. And when men seek such perfection, they find only death, fire, loss, disillusionment, and the end of everything that's gone forward. Men have always sought an end to toil and misery. It can't be given, it has to be achieved. There is hope, but it has to come from inside, from man himself.